You're listening to episode number 112 of the Transform Your Life from the Inside Out podcast. In this episode, I talk about, despite the title and the title being Remove Yourself from Humanity, what I want to talk about in this episode is removing yourself from the toxicity and negativity of humanity. Keep listening. Hi, I'm Jim Fortin, and you're about to start transforming your life from the inside out with this podcast. I'm widely considered the leader in subconscious transformation, and I've coached super achievers all around the world for over 25 years. Here, you're going to find no rah-rah motivation and no hype, because this podcast is a combination of brain science, transformational psychology, and ancient wisdom all rolled into one to take your life to levels you've never thought possible. If you're wanting a lot more in life, to feel better, to heal, to have peace of mind, to feel powerful and alive, and to bring more abundance and prosperity into your life, then this podcast is for you, because you're going to start learning how to master your mind and evolve your consciousness. And when you do that, anything you want then becomes possible for you. I'm glad you're here. Okay, so removing yourself from the negativity and toxicity of humanity. I have a question for you. And that question is this. In the world around you, what pertains to you? So I want you to ponder that, and I want you to consider that. What pertains to you in the world around you? Now, I'm going to leave that question for now, and I'm going to come back to it in just a minute. But another question for you is this. Are you trapped in a sea of humanity and the negativity and the fear that humanity gets into? Now, I don't know when you're going to be listening to this episode, but this is May 2020, and obviously we still have some stuff going on in the world with, a lot of stuff going on in the world with coronavirus. And what I'm curious about is how much of the fear and negativity, because there's a lot of fear and a lot of negativity, tripping over my words there, that the masses are getting into, and it's perpetuated by a lot of social media, and especially, oh my gosh, the news, the mainstream news. Tons, and I mean just tons and tons of negativity. But how much of that negativity are you trapped in? Have you fully, have you sat down and fully thought about that? Okay, all the things that I'm hearing in the world and all the people around me and all the things that I see on social media, how much of that traps me? So, another question for you here. Look at this from a different perspective. How much of your happiness or this satisfaction that you have for right now, I mean, right before you put on this episode, how much of your happiness or the satisfaction that you have right now is wrapped around someone else in your life, some circumstance in your life, some family member in your life, some group in your life, or is it wrapped in this society as a whole? So consider that. So many people, they let people around them, and especially their friends and family, and I see a lot of that, they let the toxicity, I can't talk today, geez, they let the toxicity of their friends and their family, I'm just laughing at myself, wow, I can't talk today. They're letting the toxicity of their friends and family literally weigh them down, and they're living in these toxic environments. It's not you also, I'm thinking aloud here, it's not you, meaning the ego that you are, the John Smith or the Jane Doe or whoever, it's your mind that people infect. I remember many years ago when I started the keto, then the sensei walked up to me, and he walked up to all of us, and we were lined up. And he got really close. He was like he was going to hit us, and he got really close to our face, and everyone flinched as he came near them. And he says, "Did you notice that I didn't touch anyone, and every one of you flinched?" And he said, "That's because I moved your mind. I threw your mind well before I ever would have or could have thrown you," meaning throw us physically. And tonight I was out actually walking my dogs, and just I was kind of observing houses as I'm walking through the neighborhood and looking at people's houses, and everyone's got their TVs on, and you can see the glare through the windows, and etc. And I'm like, each house that I walk by, where is their mind? How much negativity are they in? how much toxicity are all these people in from their family, from the news, from the media, all media outlets, from the government, from politicians. How much toxicity are people in, and how much has their mind been affected, and their mind been, which I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, thrown? How much have they actually been thrown out of balance as a being based upon what's happening in their external world? So the title of this episode is Remove Yourself from Humanity. And this episode is really not about going up on a mountain and literally removing yourself from humanity, but it's about removing yourself, your mind, from the negative influences and toxicity of humanity. Okay, let's go back to what I started this episode with. I said, what pertains to you and the world? Many years ago, as I talk about on every episode, and by the way, if you're new here, I talk about on every second episode. If you're new here, which is my brother-in-law, the shaman, okay, if you're new here, go back to the very first episode and start there, or at least start from the beginning also and start listening all the way through, because when I talk about my brother-in-law, the shaman, that'll make more sense to you at this point if you're joining me, the last 3, 4, or 5 episodes or so. But my brother-in-law, the shaman, we were sitting down talking one day many years ago, and we were talking about ISIS. And he wasn't just talking to me, he was talking to other people. And he said something to me that was literally just extremely profound and it literally was a pivotal turning point in my life. He said and I don't know if it was to me, but he was looking at me, but there was a bunch of us in the room. He said, ISIS does not pertain to you. And then what he said is, what pertains to you is what you make pertain to you. Now, go back to the question that I started this episode with. What pertains to you? In your own life, what pertains to you is what you make pertain to you. To give you another example here, this was literally 20 years ago. One of my really good friends, her husband, who I did not know, and she was a good friend of mine. Her husband was a police officer, and unfortunately, he was shot and he was killed. And it really shook me up. Now, mind you, I had never met him. I did not know him, but she was a good friend of mine, and it shook me up. And I was actually traveling with my brother-in-law, the shaman, and he's like, what's going on? Come here. And he started talking. I was in a group, and he goes, come here, I want to talk to you. What's going on? And I told him, and he said, yes, you care for your friend, but do you recognize that his transition, meaning death, leaving the planet, has nothing to do with you? And then he said, I want you to look at your emotional state that you're in right now for somebody that you've never met that has nothing to do with you. So I've always remembered that lesson about and I'm going to use this word, what do I entangle myself in life? And most people entangle themselves in other people's entanglement. And entanglement means the crap people get into and their fear and their worry and everything else. Most people entangle themselves in other people's entanglement. And over the years, I've learned, fortunately, not to entangle myself in other people's entanglement. Why? Because what other people entangle themselves in doesn't pertain to me. Another episode here, I've mentioned probably 2 or 3 times, and I recognize we're on episode, I think, 112 or whatever. But I know I've mentioned a couple of times in the podcast about a physics experiment called the double slit experiment. I mean, this is real physics. It's not pseudoscience. It's not from some podunk college somewhere that, it's real science, real physics, which is the most advanced science on the planet at this point in our evolution. And in the double slit experiment, what they discovered is, which is confirming ancient wisdom, what they discovered is that the physical world literally corresponds to your thoughts about the physical world. In metaphysics, which is literally ancient wisdom, in metaphysics, basically what you think about is what you create. And physics is demonstrating that your physical world actually bends to your consciousness, to your thoughts. So let's go back to what pertains to you. What pertains to you is where, which you've heard me say a lot, is where you keep your attention. Now, it might not pertain to you in any way, but when your attention is there, you're making wherever your attention is pertain to you. And if your attention is on fear and the news and this and that and all the things that are happening in the world and the mass hysteria and all of the quite literally, the ridiculous amount of fear that the masses are getting into, if you're making that pertain to you, then guess what? It pertains to you, and that is part of your experience. Right now there's so many people in the world that are literally just freaking out. I mean, flipping out and freaking out about coronavirus. And I have chosen not to make corona pertain to me. Now, in fairness to the science-minded people, and I respect that because I'm also to some degree science-minded, what I'm very good at is weaving ancient wisdom with science. And I know that it's a virus and I know that it's real, but you know what? Working with a shaman for many years, he's told me, which I wanted to share with you guys and I didn't because of liability issues, how to heal myself in the event that I did pick up corona. But here's the thing is I don't go through my days worrying about corona. When I go out, which is not a lot because I work from home anyway, I don't wear a mask. And I do things to respect people, the social separation or whatever it's called, and 6 feet and all that kind of stuff. I do that out of respect to other people, but I'm not making corona specifically, not the virus, but specifically I'm not making the fear pertain to me. There are so many businesses, and I understand some are governed by law. Like, for example, the podcast, I work online all over the world. It really hasn't affected my business and my revenue to any large degree. Again, in fairness and respect and humbleness, I work online, so I can work anywhere. But, there are a lot of people that do obviously work brick and mortar. But I know a lot of people that also work online and they are flipping out and it's affected their business in huge ways because, oh my God, this is happening in the world and that's happening in the world. And because that's happening, it's going to affect my offer and my launch and it's going to affect this and it's going to affect that. And I want to share with you, I just don't go there. A couple of minutes ago, I don't read the news and I stopped reading the news a lot of years ago. And if I do want to know for some reason what's going on in the news, I will scan 3 news sources, generally speaking, or 4, maybe the Wall Street Journal, maybe the New York Times, sometimes CNN, sometimes Fox, back and forth, because I want to see, and people who watch those 2 different networks or those sources, CNN and Fox, are coming from 2 different worlds. But CNN, OMG, CNN, and this is not, what a lot of people do is they take up CNN and they put it against Fox for political reasons. I'm not going anywhere with that. But oh my gosh, the amount of clickbait, fear-based, negative headlines on CNN is mind-boggling. And then I think about all the people that check into CNN. And then I think about who is, which I talked about earlier, having your mind thrown. Who, meaning CNN, who's throwing their mind? All these people that are watching these news sources, who's literally like taking hooks, like fish hooks, and boom, getting right into people's minds and putting their minds into fear and toxicity and negativity, which are all things that weaken the body anyway, and science proves that. So I go back here is you look at the news, and the news, I'm thinking here what I want to say next, but the news is a great deal of sensationalism. I don't even know where you can find. I know where you can find credible. I do believe, for example, the New York Times and different sources that I believe or I have observed. Because even when I read news, I'll actually go research the news that I read to find any contrary position on it or to find out how credible it is. But I do find the New York Times relatively credible. But here's the thing: is what I look at here is news is something outside of you. It's external. And most people are letting it affect something inside of themselves, which is internal. So the question is, are you living inside, creating your own reality, or meaning are you not making all this fear in the world pertain to you? Or are you living on the outside? Are you living in the news? Are you living in the media? Are you living on the ridiculousness, and I mean ridiculousness on Facebook. I find it really interesting that people that don't know the difference between these words, the word to, T-O, the word T-O-O, which is two, and the word T-W-O, number two. I find it interesting that, and I'm just being a bit lighthearted here and a bit jovial, but people that don't know the difference between those three words are political scholars and they are experts on infectious disease and virus and epidemiology or whatever and everything else. I mean, if you look at Facebook, to me, it's a wall of toxicity of all these opinions. And speaking about living in the masses, when we had the brunt of Corona start affecting people, I think that was back the last week of February, the first week of March, or maybe the first or second week of March, thereabouts. I saw this guy on Facebook, and the thing is this, by doing a podcast, a lot of people want to friend me on Facebook. And by the way, please don't friend me on Facebook. I got probably 1,000 that I haven't even answered. And the reason I say that is not because I don't want to connect with you. It's because I don't even use my personal page on Facebook. But I had to open Facebook to actually get into one of my groups because I do transformational programs, coaching programs, and we have private groups on Facebook. And the post that popped up that one day when this Corona stuff was really getting out of hand, this guy said, whatever you do, literally his post was 911, America's going down in flames. Whatever you do, liquidate everything that you have. I'm just sitting here because I'm quiet because I'm incredulous. I mean, this guy is a scholar on, macroeconomics and economics and globalization and global economics and everything else. And here he's yelling, literally 911, fire. The United States is going down. Sure, I know nothing about economics, but why don't I crash? Why don't I have the whole world? Why don't I advise the whole world and have them crash the economy so then everybody suffers? All right, I tell you that basically for a fact. And I've remembered that story because I knew I wanted to share it at some point. But I tell you that story because I don't get into people's crap. So the question is what pertains to you and what do you entangle into? There's a phrase that I heard many years ago, and I love this phrase, and I don't know where it came from. It might even be biblical. And I use wisdom from all the books, the Torah, the Kabbalah, the I Ching, the Talmud, the Bible, things that I've heard over the years. But a phrase that I heard many years ago, and I love the phrase, is be in this world, but not of this world. Be in the world, but not of the world. Let me put that in context of working with a shaman for a lot of years, and it really made a lot of sense to me. And as I put that in a different context for you, I think it'll make sense to you. First, let me go back and put that in context for somebody who might not have understood that before I give you the context that I work from. Basically, what that means is that you are in the world, but you know what? You are an eternal, energetic, cosmic, spiritual being. That being truth, which it is truth, do not let the physical world trap you. So you're in this world, meaning you're in this physical world, but do not be, meaning all of your life, be about the physical world. Let your life be about the 99% of you or the 100% of you can't see, which is the spiritual aspect of you, the energy aspect of you. Okay, now, the context that I put it into for me is, this is something that was said to me many years ago by the shaman that I work with, is that he said the common man is hooked to other men. The spiritual warrior is hooked to infinity. What I just said there is a different way to say be in this world but not of this world. And so when I look at myself in my own life, I look at, do I hook on and into all the stuff around me, all the media, all the hype, the news, the mass hysteria, the nonsensical conversations on Facebook, and really not so much Instagram, but Facebook. Do I hook into all of that, or do I choose to, which I do, hook into infinity, which then metaphorically I hook into, you know what? I am a cosmic being. I am a spiritual being. All this stuff going on the planet literally is just a blip on the radar, like the flu was of 1817, whatever it was, or whatever's happened on the planet. To give you a different metaphor here is you can find this on YouTube, which is now censoring, by the way. You can find it on YouTube. It's by Carl Sagan. It's called The Pale, P-A-L-E, The Pale Blue Dot. Really, really good video, meaning everything in the experience of your life, in the context of your life now, has happened on this little pale blue dot, which is planet Earth. So let me bring this home a little further. I remember years ago, Instagram was created back in 2012 or so. And I remember that I was scrolling, and that's back when I used to be engaged with social media, Instagram and Facebook. But I remember one time I was scrolling Instagram, and I was just scrolling and looking at pictures and all this kind of stuff. And I got off Instagram and boom, it hit me. I'm like, you know what? I just scrolled on Instagram for an hour, and I quite literally created no additional value in my life by that hour. That's an hour that's gone. I will never have that hour again. And then that phrase that I just shared with you that I had learned years earlier popped in my head. And that phrase was, as a common man, meaning man or woman, is hooked to other men or women, meaning other humans. The common human is hooked to other humans. The spiritual warrior is hooked to infinity. And then it dawned on me in that moment, you know what? In that moment that I was scrolling Instagram, I was hooked to other people. And there was no value, meaning there's no value in hooking and connecting with other people, but there was no value that I was hooked for 1 hour just scrolling and piddling on Instagram. And I was hooked to that. And in that moment, that was a big epiphany for me, is to never do that again. And I can't say that I haven't done it again because I'm traveling or whatever, I'm stuck on it, whatever, there's just times you whip out your phone and you start scrolling. But for the most part, meaning 99% of the time, I do not do that. And so you might be wondering, well, Jim, what do you do? I will put on Audible, or I have tons and tons of audios from sitting with my brother-in-law, the shaman, and him talking to me, and I'll just switch one of those on and put one of those on to just remind myself and to remember and to re-engage and to continue to grow. But the question that I have for you, and the point of this entire episode, is, what are you hooked to? Are you trapped in the mass thought? Now, I'm not going to go into it in this episode. When Corona broke out, my brother-in-law called me and we talked that week for about an hour. And he said something that's going to piss some people off, but we're finding it to be true. He said that Corona really is nothing to be concerned about. And he said it's not really much worse than the common flu. And back in the early days of Corona, people were just mega flipping out. Now, research is demonstrating, and Rand Paul, the United States Senator, sat on the floor of the U.S. Senate. Rand Paul recently said, and I would have to guess that he did his homework and had his staff do their homework, that the death rate, the mortality rate for Corona is 0.9%. Now, in fairness to anybody listening that might be a better statistician than I am, I don't know what the death rate is for people that actually contract the regular flu percentage-wise, but 0.9% is not corresponding to all the numbers we were hearing in the early days. I'm going to go on a tangent here. There's also very, very credible research that's been published, and you're hearing more about D3, which I had mentioned on a podcast, I think 5 weeks ago or thereabouts. When I told you guys I wanted to tell you holistically how to eliminate Corona if you got it. Well, it comes down to D3 mixed with K2, which are just vitamins. And again, I'm not dispensing any medical advice. If you feel like you need to seek medical help, then seek medical help. But what I'm sharing with you is this, is the world was getting into mass hysteria that was to a large degree fanned. There was a fire, metaphorically, and it's fanned by the media. Because as you look now, and I'm sure, I guess I'm in the minority. You know what? What's interesting to me is that, mind you, I know a lot of people. And when I say a lot of people, I mean I know a lot of people because I've spoken to millions of people over the years, and I know a lot of people who do what I do. And I mean, just through my socializations over the years, I know a lot of people. And candidly, I only know of one person in all of my networks, and I guess there's more, but I only know of actually two now. I know of two people that have contracted Corona. And both of them know my brother-in-law. I have told both of them what to do, what he told them to do, and both of them, like we're in 3 or 4 days, like, hey, I'm fine. Things are great again. But what I wanted to share with you about vitamin D3 here, I know I'm off tangent, guys, but you can research this, is that D3, if you look at the aging populations in Switzerland and Italy and Spain, and do you remember that Italy and Spain in the early days had a very high mortality rate, and the world was freaking out, and media was freaking out too, because oh my God, all the people in Italy that are dying and all the people that are in Spain. Well, credible research has now demonstrated that those populations are aging populations that have high deficiencies of vitamin D in their body. So the only reason that I tell you that is in the early days of Corona. Now, of course, in the early days, that wasn't known. But what I want you to notice, and my whole point here, is how much the world was flipping out. There's a phrase that you may hear me use in the future. It's called flipping the coin. Basically, a person's flipping the coin. Heads or tails, heads or tails, heads or tails. But people were flipping out. So the whole point of this episode is go back and look at yourself in those early days. Were you flipping out? Were you getting into the mass hysteria? And specifically, were you making all the fear pertain to you? Food for thought. You know what I hear a lot of, and I have a transformational group going on right now, and what I hear a lot of in the group is people that have all pretty much mastered literally, getting out of entanglement with other people. But what I hear a lot of is, hey, Jim, I talked to my mom, and you know what? I'm cool and I'm at peace now, but my mom is flipping out and my dad is flipping out and all my family's flipping out. I mean, I saw this family yesterday when I opened Instagram. I did not scroll, like I said earlier. I opened it and there was this picture of a family at Mother's Day. And this entire family was sitting around the table at Mother's Day with masks on. And all I'm saying here is, you know what? Let me back up here. Is if you are out with people, and people will say, well, how can I be out with people and not be entangled by people? If you're out with people, this is what I want to share. Be a positive voice for human evolvement and transformation, and perhaps new ways they can reframe the fear and not to get into the fear. Because, something I want to say here that's very simple that most people miss, and I've said it before, is you can get in the fear all day long. Literally, if you want, get in the fear all day long. But you know what? You're going to waste your entire day, because getting into fear is literally being in the future, and the future is not here yet. You're not being in the present. And literally what you're doing is you're wasting the present right now by being in the fear for something that's probably not going to happen later. That being said, look at all the people, all the hoarders, these people that were hoarding back 2 months ago, all the fear they got into and all the things that they were hoarding and all the fear they got into, none of it happened anyway. I'm on a tangent. I'm going off on tangents here. But to show you how reactive human beings are, when I was at Whole Foods recently, the lady bagging my groceries, very wise lady, she said, we were talking about all the hoarders and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not a hoarder. When I'd go, I'd get what I'd need. I'd get what I needed. And that was about it. And the lady that was bagging my groceries, we were just chit-chatting, and she said something very wise. She goes, all those people that were hoarding, what they never thought about is if they were hoarding, meaning other people weren't getting food, what happens when all their neighbors, and this is a metaphor, but literally it makes sense. What happens when all their neighbors are out of food and they're hungry? Then how safe and secure is all the food they've been hoarding? And I want to share that with you. All the people that were hoarding, they're selfish freaking people. Unless they literally had an old folks home and they need food for an old folks home, they're selfish. And if that hits home with you, then it hits home with you as well. Because guess what? What happens if people hoard and there's not enough? And then guess what happens when the masses run out of food? You're not safe, which is why you started hoarding in the first place, or people's, not you, but people started hoarding in the first place, is because they wanted to be safe. Okay, entanglements. Let's go back to that. Let me come back to the topic at hand today, is entanglement with other people. And we talk about, you living and what pertains to you. Do you entangle in the negativity even your family? And there's either a yes or a no or a maybe or a kind of to that. I removed my father from my life many years ago. My father was a tremendously tremendously toxic, verbally abusive individual, an alcoholic. But not all alcoholics are obviously verbally abusive, but he was just toxic. And a lot of people have the belief that because they're my mother or they're my father, then I have to, which I'm using here the word entanglement, I have to be around them and I have to listen to their stuff and I've got to be caught in that web of toxicity and negativity. And one of my students said something to me one time, and the way they put the phrase I think is brilliant. They said, just because we share DNA doesn't mean that we share proximity and time together. So again, I'm asking you in many different ways. I'm not asking you to take this literally. I'm not asking you to cut anybody out of your life. I'm just asking you more than anything to look at what are you entangling in? Do other people, do your mother, does your father, does your family, do they trap you like people get trapped in humanity? Do they trap you in their toxicity when you are around them? And that's something that I want you to look at, because guess what? That is very costly, like we talked about in last week's podcast, last week's episode, about a large percentage of your thinking is toxicity. And that's why you're not creating what you want to create in life, because without even recognizing it, you're into toxic thinking, not even recognizing that it's toxic thinking. And that's actually bringing down your thinking, your feeling, your vibration, and your frequency. By the way, you can trace all that back and learn more about that in episode number 9. But you're bringing down your entire vibration and frequency because of the thinking and feeling, because of the toxicity around you and of the toxicity in the world around you. I do want to point out, which is obvious, it's obvious. I'm on the planet just like you, and I'm in Earth school is what I call it, and I'm learning my lessons just like you are. Everyone's learning lessons. We're all just learning different lessons while we're here on the planet. And you know what? It can be easy sometimes to get sucked into Facebook or Instagram. And that's why basically now I do what I need to do on Facebook or Instagram. And as a matter of fact, I don't even post on Instagram. My team does it for me. But for the most part, I don't go there because I know how easy it can be to get sucked into that stuff. And I remind myself, here's the big takeaway. And I got there in a circuitous way in this time together. Anyway, I was going to apologize, but I'm not going to apologize for it. But I remind myself that if I get trapped in other people's crap, their fear, their stories, their worries, if I get trapped in all of that by being in it and paying attention to it, then I'm hooked to other people and I'm hooked to the masses. And let me share something with you. I'm going to say this in a way, and I promise this isn't judgmental, but it's a fact. When I say it was in a movie, as a matter of fact, and I'm going to paraphrase here. But in the movie Tommy Boy, it was a comedy with Chris Farley back in the 1990s, and I love this phrase that I'm going to share with you. But Ray Zelinsky, he was an auto king kind of guy. He had this big auto parts company. And Ray Zelinsky, which was played by by Dan Aykroyd, he said something along these lines that I want to share with you, because it doesn't pertain to you. If it pertained to you, you would not be listening to this podcast. But he said something along the lines of what, and I'm gonna paraphrase this. I'm gonna change, because he said the working man. Basically, what he said is what the working man doesn't know is what makes him the working man. What the working man doesn't know is what makes him the working man. And that there's truth in that in economics, because in the world we live in right now, 78% of the population lives paycheck to paycheck in the United States. There's a whole lot the working class does not know, or they would not be living paycheck to paycheck. Not the point. But where I want to go is what the masses don't know is it's what makes them the masses. It's what puts people in the hysteria and the mass fear and the toxicity of that. And I mentioned double slit experiment earlier. Everything is feeling, everything is vibration, everything is frequency. Well, feeling's not talked about in the double slit experiment, but physics, everything molds to your consciousness. Everything molds to your thinking. And if you're in that toxicity of humanity and you stay in that toxicity of negativity of humanity and the fear associated with it, because planet Earth right now quite literally has like a blanket of fear on it, if you're trapped in the sea of toxicity and negativity, guess what? You are creating that experience for you, because we all create our own experiences based upon where we hold our thinking, which creates our feeling, which creates our vibration, which creates our frequency. So your transformational takeaway this week is pretty simple, is remove yourself. Remove yourself from the toxicity and negativity and fear of the masses. But the real takeaway is this, are you ready? What pertains to you based upon, we're going to talk about thinking, okay, and the fear and the worry and all that in the world. What pertains to you is what you make pertain to you. One more time. What pertains to you is what you make pertain to you. Okay, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you over on the next episode. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this entire podcast. If you're the kind of person who likes to help others, then share this with your friends and family. You know, if you found value, they will too. So please share via your social media channels. Also, if you have questions, I'm here to assist. You can email me questions to support@jimfortin.com, and I may even use your question for a future podcast episode. Also, if you want transformational content like this daily, connect with me on Instagram. My Instagram name is I am Jim Fortin. Finally, I do have a personal request. I believe that we're all here to help others and to grow and evolve ourselves. Together, you and I, let's help more people. If you would please leave a review on iTunes, and a good one, by the way. I'd be grateful, and through your assistance together, we can transform more lives. Thanks for listening.